am so excited to be back with a new season of the Caroline Gleich Show. I am excited to take you along on the campaign trail as I run to become Utah's next United States Senator. On today's episode, we are going to be talking with Reed Galen, and I'm stoked about this episode because Reed is a hero of mine. He is so smart and has a ton of experience working in government. Reed Galen is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. He's the author of The Homefront on Substack. He has nearly 30 years of national political experience, including 3 presidential campaigns and too many others to count. Reed now spends his time ensuring Donald Trump isn't reelected and working on repairing American democracy. I'm really excited to catch up with him today about defending democracy and to go over what's at stake in the 2024 election. I am so excited to speak with you today, Reed. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for all your leadership in politics for the last 3 decades. On the Lincoln Project's website, you state that 2024 is a battle for America's future. Can you explain more what you mean by that?
Sure. I think that, it's for a long time in politics, we've always tried to motivate voters by saying this is the most important election of our lives. We keep having those. And 2024 is no exception. I think the difference here now is that you have a repeat of 2020, which I understand a lot of people aren't happy with, but there are a lot of times in life that we don't get everything we want. But also this is not an equivalent choice, right? Joe Biden is, okay, he's older, right? But he is a good president. He's a good person. He is decent. And I think that, the first 3.5 years of his presidency have been, all things considered, very successful given the mess he was given when he started. Donald Trump is a bad person who is admitting to wanting to do bad things for the majority of the country. And so I think on Election Day 2024, we have a choice between what Biden called himself as a bridge to the future and a bridge to nowhere. Biden will engender, 4 more years of, I think, normalcy, relatively speaking, but also a pathway to what America is going to be in the second quarter of the 21st century. What are we going to be next? Donald Trump ends all of that. The train tracks lead off a cliff. Everything you care about from a policy perspective, it could be the environment, it could be reproductive rights, it could be national security, it could be the economy. Name your issue. Right? It all goes away because there will be no discussion. There will be no debate. There will be no progress in these things. They will all be based on the whim of one individual and their mood and a collection of ne'er-do-wells and rogues and crooks and weirdo ideologues who have a very specific vision for how they believe the country should operate.
Yeah, I mean, you had so many years of working on this, and especially your experience working on the broader geopolitical piece in the different campaigns that you've done. And have you seen other examples in other countries about how democracy dies?
Yeah, I mean, look, it can be a quick death. It can be a slow death. I think, a really good example is a place like Hungary, right, where, Viktor Orban, he was an anti-communist back in the late 80s and early 90s, right? He was someone who stood at the barricades as the Berlin Wall fell. He was out of power, then he got back in power, and he sort of became a right-wing authoritarian. Can you vote in Hungary? You can. Can you have generally the job you want? Okay. But the truth is that if you are against him, or if you're against his government, then you're less likely to have economic success, the kind of freedom you want. And so, that's probably the starting point for a second Trump term. But you're also going to see the kind of persecution of political opponents that you see in other places that, do I believe we'll get to like a Russia type totalitarianism right away? No. And hopefully never. But it's going to be a much different perspective on what American democracy means. Everybody, Trump said in Time magazine this week, I don't think that, I'm not going to serve more than another term. Like, why would anybody believe him? right? He tried to burn down the government to stay the first time. So you'll forgive me if I don't believe that he'll go quietly in 2028 if he's still around.
Do you see indications that democracy in America is backsliding?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think we've seen that. But again, I think that, think about it this way, like Trump came at a, if we're going to use the expression body politic, let's make this like a medical metaphor for a minute. The American democratic body has been weakened over the course of decades. Some of that by active measures by a lot of very conservative people who've been working on this for 40 or 50 or 60 years. But a lot of it on just the idea that like, it's fine. Everything's fine, right? We don't really need to do any work. And so what you've seen is a separation between voters with an understanding of why their vote matters, right? We don't teach civics anymore. So it's very hard for the part-time voter to understand the importance of a democratic system when we don't teach them about the importance of a democratic system. We've seen the rise of massive corporate power, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Gilded Age of, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And largely, when if you look back at like 2015, and you hear Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump talking, like in their speeches, they're talking about how the little guy's getting screwed by big corporate interests and big government. And they're not always wrong, right? And that's why you've seen sort of a populism rising, is that, yes, there's a cultural belief that, the coasts make fun of flyover country like we are in Utah. And some of that's true, but that's not new, right? Cosmopolitan elites have always looked down on country folk. But I think the difference is that Trump gave those people a vehicle. So to go back is Trump was, if you're already got the flu, Trump's pneumonia, right, for American democracy. And without a significant, battery of, political antibiotics, for lack of a better way to put it, he'll kill the patient. Think about this, we think about 2020, Trump lost by 7 million popular vote in the popular vote, but he lost Arizona by 13,000 votes. He lost Georgia by 11,000 votes. He lost Wisconsin by 20,000 votes, like 150,000 votes over 4 or 5 states. So still very, very close. So are we backsliding? We are. And again, we will continue that backslide with Trump in office a second time. It will get worse. We're certainly seeing it again in, Supreme Court decisions like gutting the Voting Rights Act. And we're seeing a lot of this stuff in the old Confederacy in the Mountain West. So yeah, we've dropped from, in the top 10 on the Economist Democracy Index, and I think we're like 27th now. Like that's not okay. Yeah.
What you spoke to that really struck me there was the rise of corporate power and corporate interest, and how really that is what we should be fighting against. And so how do you think we can kind of unite and break through the partisan divide to fight the common enemy here?
Well, again, I think that I'm going to put this in the context of what I know best, but 2024 is the best way to do that, because again, will everything that we need to get done because Joe Biden wins? No, but we got a heck of a lot better chance of getting it done. And we've seen this administration's Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, run by a woman named Lena Khan. She's going to court against Google here, I think later this year. She's filed suit against Amazon for antitrust. She's taking, big tech to task. And so, look, I think that in a country where, let's just use the Amazon example, in a country where you can order literally anything and have it show up on your doorstep in 48 hours, the idea that you have 3 cell phone companies, that you have 5, cable providers, that you have 2 political parties to choose from, right? It's all fundamentally anti-democratic and fundamentally anti-competition. And, it's not surprising when something grows as big as Google's grown. What do they want to do? Make sure that nobody can rise against them. And look, I have worked inside corporate America, right? Like I have worked for some bad people. I have seen this stuff up close. And let me just remind your listeners, they are not your friends. Big oil is not your friend, right? Big telecom is not your friend, right? These people have no interest whatsoever in making sure that the individual American is okay. They have a product they want to sell, and they will do whatever it is they think they need to make sure you have to buy it and buy it from them.
Going back to that, I mean, one thing that I'm really interested in with my candidacy is the opportunity to bring some common sense reform to how we regulate these monopoly big tech companies. And I'd love to hear from you. What do you think Congress needs to do to restore our privacy and to bring some regulation to how they use our data?
Right. I mean, look, I think that first and foremost, I think it's a really interesting time when you have very progressive Democrats in Congress coming together with very conservative Republicans on issues like this. That, you know, it's you wouldn't think about that, right? I mean, politics, strange bedfellows, all that. Now, I'm no privacy expert, so let me be clear about that. But I think that you do have the ability to start to move on this stuff, so long as you have a White House that's willing to go along with it. I think also, you know, we shouldn't sleep on different states, right? I mean, in this Google case, right, I think there's like 15, maybe 20 states who have joined the federal government in this case, right? So and I assume it's not just red states or blue states. My guess is it's probably a mix of those. So, you know, you are seeing that even for people who have nothing else in common, that they are willing to come, along on this. But look, it's not just privacy. I mean, it's the idea that, for example, in Florida, right? In Florida, if you live on the coast, it's nearly impossible to get homeowners insurance, right? Which you need to have to buy a house, right? What does that mean, right? The health insurance industry is so broken that, I was listening to another podcast the other day, Caroline, where most health insurance companies will tolerate some fraud that they know is going on, and because it's easier for them just to jack rates on customers than it is to have like a full-fledged fraud department. Like, that's not okay. This is where, like, I grew up a Republican, right? And so, Republicans are always like, oh, government bad, but government does have a role to play. And you talked about regulation. We have reached sort of in-state, like Chicago School of Economics and Ayn Rand BS of like, corporations should be able to do whatever they want to do. Again, I'm no progressive, right? I do have a solid libertarian streak in me, but I also have a streak of like, I just don't like big that much, right? I don't like the fact that like you and I are speaking down the, tubes of AT&T or Verizon, whoever it is. Like, I don't really care other than the fact that, to your point about privacy, is they know everything you and I know. They know everything we're doing. Our phones are next to us. They're listening to us, right? And I'm not saying conspiracy theorist. Like, I accept these things, right? But the idea too, though, that like we're just, to use a Matrix expression, right? We're just copper top batteries for these people, right? Like they want us in the Matrix. And we've reached a point where I think now the pendulum needs to swing back a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've worked in Republican politics for a long time, 2 decades. How do you see that the party has kind of fallen into this chaos and complicity in enabling a criminal like Donald Trump to lead the party?
Again, I think a lot of it was complacency and a lot of it was ignorance. And when I say ignorance, not only not knowing, but also actually ignoring people, which was, there has always been, let me tell a story. So I worked on the 2004 George W. Bush campaign, and I hope your listeners don't throw their phones across the room when they hear that. But we'd have these big meetings in the big conference room where we were, senior staff meetings. And there was this guy in the corner, Gary, right? And Gary wore a gray suit, a white shirt, and a red tie every day. And he had like this weird high and tight haircut and his crazy look in his eyes. And Gary was the social conservative guy on the campaign. And nobody wanted to hang out with Gary. And Gary didn't really want to hang out with us. The mistake we made, Caroline, back in 2004 is that we thought he was in the room with us. And the mistake was we were in the room with him, right? They had the power on the most extreme side because that's where the bodies were. That's where the organization were, the Christian evangelicals and, the Tea Partiers and all these kinds of people. We didn't understand that like they were giving us their votes, but they weren't really ever happy about it. They didn't have any place else to go. And so, if you, back in the day, if you did a focus group of Republican hardcore Republican voters, and you ask them about Nancy Pelosi, for argument's sake, boo hiss, boo hiss. If you ask them about Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or John Boehner, like they were throwing stuff at the mirror, right? Like they hated them because Pelosi was the opponent. You were supposed to dislike her, but people like McConnell and Ryan were betrayers of the cause because they had sold out to corporate America and wealthy interests and all that. But like, that's like what they thought. So everybody took everything for granted. Now, the difference with Trump was he brought all of these zombies out of the woods who otherwise didn't have a place in the American political system because they too hate everybody. And in Trump, they did see their sort of retribution, which was a guy who was willing to come in and burn it all down, right? And so these people are only in the mix because of Trump. And my guess is if Trump loses again, a lot of them will recede back into the woods because they'll say, well, the establishment won again, or they kept him out because they're only here for him. And it's probably 25 or 30% of the Republican base.
Yeah. It seems to me that we really do need to vote a lot of these established politicians out of office because they're so deeply entrenched in the needs and serving the interests of big corporations. And you and I have had the opportunity to chat about my candidacy. Mm-hmm. What excites you about this campaign for U.S. Senate?
Well, one, that it's different, right? Campaigns are really boring, right? For the most part, because everybody's like, oh, you can't do this. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, we have to be very careful, right? We have to say the right thing. We have to do the right thing. We have to have the really crappy 30-second television ads and blah, 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 blah. And you are the opposite of all of that. I think I told you the first time I met you, like you have it. Right. Most candidates don't have it, and they wouldn't even know it if it bit them on the rear end. Right. And so, a lot of politics is personal. Politics is emotional. And, based on the kind of work you've done in the past, as running for office is hard. Most days are not that fun. But the things that you're able and willing to do on the natural, like jump off a cliff on skis or climb a mountain or something, like most of us couldn't imagine doing. Like I can get on skis, but I'm not jumping off any cliffs, right? I'll be lucky to stay upright no matter how often I try. So I think that a lot of the things that you take for granted as the stuff that you do every day will be inherently valuable to you as a candidate. And I think also don't deny the ability of someone who is new to this to also have an understanding of issues. Like there are, this doesn't tend to happen with folks like you who are very engaged in the state, engaged in your community, engaged in the issues of the state. Usually it's like wealthy people like, oh, I've never been in politics, but I'm smart enough to know, like I'm rich, therefore I'm smart. Like you have a very clear understanding of your candidacy, of who you are. Right. And that comes through in person. I think that comes through on camera. And so, look, it's going to be an uphill climb, but we live in a state of mountains. Right. So like you climb mountains for a living. The other part, too, is that whoever it is you ultimately end up running against is going to be, pardon my French, crazy. Right. If you have to bleep that, go ahead. But like these are crazy people. Right. Flat out crazy people. And in a state like Utah, is there a growing acceptance of MAGA amongst the political class that's typically Republican? Yes, because they'll say whatever it is they need to those people just to sort of get them to leave them alone. But you're seeing look, when the LDS Church says don't vote for just one party, there's a sea change. There's a sea change happening.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to hear what advice you have from your experience working on campaigns for my campaign, because working on campaigns is like, it is just such a workaholic atmosphere. Like you work so hard every day. You give it everything you can. It's kind of a toxic work environment in some ways because you only have the short amount of time to do as much as you can. So how do you maintain balance and your mental well-being and physical?
A lot of those things have suffered over the years. I'm making a concerted effort this year to be more balanced in all those things that you've talked about. The idea, look, I've been at this against Trump really since he took office, but, on a day-to-day basis for nearly 4.5 years. So there are definitely days, Caroline, when my brain is wrung out. And, I mean, being the anthropologist of one of the worst people in humanity is really not always a great job.
Right.
But, there's that old expression, like when you're tired, you rest, you don't give up. And so, I think it's understanding what it is you can do, what you need to do, where your highest and best use is. It's impossible to do everything. So for me, look, I have a very narrow remit for electoral purposes, right? Like I focus on a very narrow band of voters in Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I write a lot, I talk a lot, I'm on TV, I do all those other things. And so that's sort of the broader outlet, like how I see things, why we should do these things. But the truth is this ultimately going to come down to making sure the right people go to the polls. And when they get there, they do what we need them to do. And so, that's a fairly discrete list of things to do. Doesn't mean they're easy. Doesn't mean there's always a good day. Sometimes you have bad days. Some days you feel like I can conquer the world. Other days you're like, I can't believe we have to do this again. And, I think the mental part and the physical part actually go hand in hand, as you know, which is I'm trying to be much more cognizant of my physical health. I hate running, so I don't run. I'll run only if chased, and often by a bear. Not often by a bear, but if it was going to be running, it would be by a bear. But look, whether or not it's walking the dogs or the Peloton or the bike or skiing or whatever it is, yoga, I started doing yoga. So, I can't do the hot room though, Caroline. The hot room makes me feel like I'm going to die. Me too. But, just doing things, and you can probably appreciate this more than anyone. Doing something that makes it literally impossible for you to think about anything other than what you're doing in that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is really refreshing and I find recharging.
Yeah, I really need to take more time with my phone on do not disturb or even airplane mode, because all those dings and the buzzes all day, it's hard on your adrenal system, the fight or flight. But I do really appreciate about you that you have such an urgency to tackle these issues. And someone who's worked in the mountains for a long time, I've really spent a lot of time analyzing risk management and kind of the decision making that leads people to make bad choices in the mountains. One of the things is like the group think, when you get into a big group and everybody just has their head down and they all are heading towards the edge of a cliff, right? And you have to be willing to speak up. I was really hesitant in some ways about filing as a Democrat, because you don't want to just like go with the group. I'm an independent-minded person. And so to be able to put the principle over party and to have your conscience lead you. But there's a lot of people in Utah who also describe themselves like, we have really independent-minded voters here. And so what would you say to those independent-minded voters and moderate Republicans who want change but aren't sure about voting for someone with a D next to their name?
Yeah, look, I think oftentimes we overcomplicate campaigns with issues. Campaigns really come down to values more than anything. You're voting your values. Now, in the old days, Caroline, it was very easy to understand a value set based on an R or a D, right? You had a pretty good understanding of what that meant. I think for Republicans, like I used to be, I'm an independent now, R represents something I frankly want nothing to do with. And so what I would say to those independents and Republicans who are unhappy with the party as it's become, as I have, I left and I'm not sure I could ever go back, is, you don't have to be beholden to a group that has no interest in being beholden to you. These people have no interest in you whatsoever. They see you as rubes. They see you as a means to an end. And let me tell you, if you care about things like individual liberty, right, your ability to decide how your family's going to operate, right, and that could be, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, choice issues, right? If you have daughters at home like I do you want people in Salt Lake City or Washington, D.C. or a bunch of unelected judges telling your daughters how they got to live their lives? Because I sure as hell don't, right? And so, and I think that, we used to call, in Republican circles, we used to call environmentalism, we weren't going to be environmentalists, we were going to be conservationists. And my guess is that most people who enjoy, not most people, but, half the people that enjoy, 3/4 of the people, even in a state like Utah, that enjoy state parks, national parks, Moab, Zion, Bryce Canyon, the mountains, whatever it is, right? They probably have R's behind their names. We went to Escalante for October break last year. We'd never been down there. It was freaking incredible, right? Do you want coal mines dug in there, right? Because we have to have a sop to the coal industry because, coal equals Republican or conservative or MAGA. Like, makes no sense. Like, we don't need more coal, right? Even coal companies know we don't need more coal. And so it's really a question of values. Like, what do you care about? What kind of state do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a state where, like, if the Great Salt Lake dries up, welcome to the big arsenic dust cloud that's going to kill everybody, right? Like, it's nihilistic almost, Caroline, right? So, like, what do you want for your family? What values do you want? Like, do you want insanity or do you want sanity? Do you want decency or do you want these people? And I think there's a lot of people, and look, you're going to have to work your tail off. I get it, right? To go out and talk to people. And that's the other part, is getting into a lot of places where, look, Republicans in the state in Utah can take it for granted, right? Because we have one media market. It's Salt Lake City. And that's where, you got St. George and you got other places, and they have their own newspapers, maybe their own radio stations, but for the most part, everybody's watching KSL or whatever its version, and that goes from the Idaho border to the Arizona border, right? Yeah. And from Nevada to Colorado. And so, a lot of those places, you just have to say, like, I'm going to go out there and see people that haven't been seen. You listen, you've probably done this, or you're going to do it soon, is you go to some of these towns along I-15, right? These are forgotten people.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they have a new Intermountain Health Center, right?
Hopefully.
But other than that, a lot of these places that aren't connected to a major tourist destination, like, these are people who have been left behind.
Yeah.
And, life is probably pretty rough in those places. And so what I think is trying to encourage people who don't believe the system has anything to offer for them, or that their vote doesn't matter, is hard. Like, I've done it. I was on the doors a couple of years ago in 2022, and these can be 5, 10, 15-minute conversations. But I'll tell you this, for every one of those, if you go from 0 votes to half a vote, right? Like, it's all worth it. And I know I sound like old fashioned and almost like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or Miss Caroline Goes to Washington, but, like, that stuff matters. It matters to get out there and see people who haven't been seen, and frankly feel unseen, and frankly should.
Yeah. No, that's great. Going along those lines, I think a lot of everyday Utahns feel like their vote here doesn't matter as much, and that they don't have as much influence, especially because our big presidential election is going to come down just to a couple of handfuls of votes in a couple of key states. And so what can everyday Utahns do to defend democracy and to, avoid these worst case scenarios you're talking about?
Well, look, I think inside Utah, it's, looking, first and foremost, taking a look at the candidates that are running statewide. And then in your area too. The reason why, the Republican Party owns the legislature, and we have a dictatorship of the legislature here. The governor is a very weak position because it's a supermajority. So anytime the governor does something they don't like, they just overturn it. Is looking at, like, okay, who's in your district, right? We live in Summit County. I think we have 3 state representatives and 2 state senators for a county of 50,000 people. Like, that's how much they dislike us up here, right, Caroline? So
we're also very gerrymandered. We're not in the same district.
That's what I mean. Yeah. I across 224, there's a different state legislative district, right? So I could throw a rock and hit a different state legislator. But it's like, the process matters. The process of getting out there and saying, okay, what am I going to do? It could be knocking on doors. It could making phone calls. It could be texting somebody. It could be going to an event. It could just be being a better part of your community. Yeah. A lot of these things, we oversimplify, but, so much of this has happened because we've lost a sense of community. That we've lost a sense of each other. Look, you and I are seeing each other on Zoom. We were lucky enough to see each other in person a couple of times in the course of a month. And we need more of that. Yeah. It's really easy to just sit on your phone and say, well, I looked at something, I did something. Okay, great. Yeah, you liked something on Twitter. You liked something on Facebook. You retweet, you did something on Instagram. That's all great, right? You put the heart button. But that's not work. And I think that's the other part, is, like, politics is work. If you want to be successful at it, it's really hard to be lazy. Like, you could be lazy in Tooele, right, if you're running unopposed. Anywhere else, like, it's work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard work. Well, I'm excited to put the hard work in. And I also think a lot of these conversations They can be like in the group chat or around the dinner table. So don't be afraid to bring up politics at the dinner table, because I think we can really influence a lot of hearts and minds of our aunts and uncles, family members, and we can really change a lot of those conversations. Reed, how can we support and follow your work and your leadership?
Sure. Please, look, I'm on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, over at Substack. It's called The Homefront. I hope you'll follow me over there. I host the Lincoln Project podcast, so you can always listen to that. So there's, it's hard to get away from me, and I hope everybody will, follow along, and, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And, Caroline, let me know when you need to hit the road, and we'll gas up the GX and see Utah.
Thank you so much, Reed. I really, really appreciate your time today. I really appreciate everything you're doing, using your voice and the messages you're putting out with the Lincoln Project, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks, Caroline.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Caroline Gleich Show. Please give us a share, leave us a nice review, and you can learn more about the campaign at carolineforutah.com. If you can, chip in a couple bucks. It really helps us meet our fundraising goals, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.